Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We have reached the 9th chapter of the part 1 of the Synthesis of Yoga, Yoga of Divine Works. For those who are new, we are reading Sri Aurobindo's The Synthesis of Yoga line by line. And this book is really like a portal through which we can come in touch with the consciousness of Sri Aurobindo, and the very act of reading infuses his yogic consciousness into us. So that's a sadhana in itself. And we have completed now 8 chapters of the part 1. The last one was the Supreme Will. And we saw how the Supreme Will acts through the individual when you open to its action. Now, in this 9th chapter, Sri Aurobindo is giving us the conditions where the Supreme Will can act through the individual and bring its infinite potentiality into the instrumentation. So this is episode 108. We are starting with paragraph number 1. And I highly recommend you to follow the lines as Sri Aurobindo has written, line by line, read together so that we can enjoy the way he is taking us through this journey. So, paragraph number 1, Equality and the Annihilation of Ego, that's the title. You will find link to this chapter in the description. So you can use that link to find this chapter. Let's begin. An entire self-consecration, a complete equality, an unsparing effacement of the ego. An entire self-consecration, a complete equality, an unsparing effacement of the ego, a transforming deliverance of the nature from its ignorant modes of action are the steps by which the surrender of all the being and nature to the divine will can be prepared and achieved as self-giving, true, total, and without reserve. So, an entire self-consecration, all that we are, is offered to the divine, and a complete equality. So, in this chapter, this is what we will be exploring: equality, a complete equality, an unsparing effacement of the ego. That's the second aspect we will be exploring in this chapter: equality and annihilation of the ego. A transforming deliverance of the nature from its ignorant modes of action. Ignorant modes of action. Prakriti, the nature has triple modes of sattva, rajas, tamas. These are the modes of action. From its ignorant modes of action are the steps by which the surrender of all the being and nature to the divine will can be prepared and achieved as self-giving, true, total, and without reserve. So these are the 4 aspects of that transformation: self-consecration, equality, effacement of the ego, and transforming deliverance of the nature from its ignorant modes of action. These 4 things. 3 gunas, that's part of nature. Ego of the individual who is evolving. And equality of the sadhak, inner consciousness. And a complete self-consecration. These 4 constitute the steps by which the surrender of all the being and nature, the nature, our psychological, vital, physical nature, the surrender of all the being and nature to the divine will. Because this yoga is done by the divine will, and we have to surrender the whole being and nature to the divine will. And this surrender is done through these 4 steps: consecration, equality, effacement of the ego, and the modes of action of nature, transforming deliverance of the nature from its ignorance modes of action, are the steps by which the surrender of the being and nature to the divine will can be prepared and achieved as self-giving, true, total, and without reserve. Any part of our being is not hidden. Everything is opened up, offered. Nothing is reserved. The first necessity is an entire spirit of self-consecration in our works. That's the first necessity of the 4. The first necessity is an entire spirit of self-consecration in our works. The spirit of self-consecration. Consecrating all that we are, the very spirit of it. The outer form will evolve. The first is to bring the very spirit of self-consecration. It must become first the constant will. So we have to consciously will it to consecrate everything that we do, remembering and offering. A constant will to offer. So it must become first the constant will. Once the will is set, then the ingrained need in all the being. So initially, for us, the self-consecration is not the need of the being. We understand it through the mind. There is something like consecration. That is a mental understanding. And then slowly we are bringing in the will to consecrate. And as we start consecrating consciously, continuously, repeatedly, slowly it becomes the need of the being. That is the second part. So it must become first the constant will, then the ingrained need in all the being, not just a mental being, but vital being, physical being, all the triple layers of our being, they start feeling the need to consecrate. Finally, it's automatic but living and conscious habits. Usually habits are unconscious, mechanical. When something is conscious, it is no more mechanical, though it may be following the same outer form, but there is a conscious presence, a conscious will behind the action. So that becomes a conscious act. And even if it is automatic, it has that conscious presence and will driving it, even if it is a habit. So it must become first the constant will, then the ingrained need in all the being. Finally, it's automatic but living and conscious habits. The self-existent turn to do all action as a sacrifice. So the self-existent turn, our inner being, from that space, it turns towards making all action into a sacrifice, an offering to the divine, to the supreme, and to the veiled power. Veiled power. Because we are at this stage not consciously, or rather, we cannot see directly the presence. The supreme power who is animating everything. It is a veiled power, present in us and in all beings and in all the workings of the universe. There is this power that is behind the veil, what we see as nature, as all this manifold movement. These are all veils. Behind it is the Supreme. It is a veiled power of the Supreme who is acting everywhere in everything. So let's read this line once again. The first necessity is an entire spirit of self-consecration in the works. It must become first the constant will, then the ingrained need in all the being. Finally, it's automatic but living and conscious habit. The self-existent turn to do all action as sacrifice to the Supreme, sacrifice to the Supreme. So everything that we do is a direct conscious offering to the Supreme and to the veiled power present in us and in all things. This power is present in us and all things, present in us and in all beings and in all the workings of the universe. Life is the altar of this sacrifice. Life is the altar of this sacrifice. Works are our offering. So this line of Sri Aurobindo, all life is yoga, it would come here. Life is the altar of this sacrifice. Works are our offerings. And works doesn't mean anything that we do as a professional work. Every action done bodily, every action done in the mind as a thought, and every emotional labor, everything is an offering. Everything is part of the work. A transcendent and universal power and presence, as yet rather felt or glimpsed than known or seen by us, is the deity to whom they are offered. So there is this universal power and presence. We can feel its presence or glimpse, but not necessarily seen. And it is the deity to whom offering is made. So life is the altar of this sacrifice. Works are our offerings. A transcendent and universal power and presence, as yet rather felt or glimpsed than known or seen by us, is the deity to whom they are offered. And this is what we see when we study Rig Veda, the very first mandala, the very first Rig. Invocation to Agni. It is to this fire. And it is not a ritual fire. The whole life is that field, the altar. And in that, there is this ascending fire to whom we are offering. This deity is veiled, and Agni itself is a representation or one of the aspects of the supreme deity. But our first contact is like this fire. Life is the altar of this sacrifice. Works are our offering. A transcendent and universal power and presence, as yet rather felt or glimpsed than known or seen by us, is the deity to whom they are offered. This sacrifice, this self-consecration, has two sides to it. What are they? There is the work itself, and there is the spirit in which it is done. The spirit of worship to the master of works in all that we see, think, and experience. So on one side, inner dimension, there is the spirit of work. Other is the outer form of work. These are the two things. There is an outer mold of action, outer form of action. Behind it, there is the spirit of action. Take, for example, when we are eating our meal. That's an outer form. It's a mold. Having meals. Now, the inner state from where we perform that action, that is where the spirit of action, the underlying consciousness behind the action come into picture. So this sacrifice, this self-consecration has two sides to it. There is the work itself, and there is the spirit in the work, spirit in which it is done. The spirit of worship to the master of works. So the spirit is that of worship. In worship, what we do, we make the offerings to the deity. So that's the spirit of worship. Any little action, every little thing that we do is a conscious worship. The spirit of worship to the master of works in all that we see, think, and experience. We see, think, and experience. And experience is through all the senses. Everything that we experience through the senses and all that we see, even think, everything. In that context is the offering. The work itself is at first determined by the best light we can command in our ignorance. So we are living in our ignorance, and whatever be the highest, the best light we can get. Usually, the best that we have access to is the rational intelligence and its principles. Before we come in touch with the psychic being, that's our highest faculty as of now in our current stage of evolution. It is that which we conceive as the thing that should be done. So whatever be the highest perspective we have, highest faculty we have, from there, it is that which we conceive as the thing that should be done. So our conception coming from the highest faculty available to us, from there the work begins. And whether it be shaped by our sense of duty, by our feeling for our fellow creatures, by our idea of what is for the good of others or the good of the world, or by the direction of one whom we accept as a human master, wiser than ourselves and for us the representative of the Lord of all works, in whom we believe, but whom we do not yet know. The principle is the same. So here is giving a whole range of action, the way we perform action, the way we conceive the action. Many of our action come from sense of duty, social responsibilities. We are born into a network of relationship and we do have social responsibilities. So often this is done as my duty. That can be included. But what is important is the spirit in which the action is done. Even when you are performing your social responsibilities and duties. The next is our fellow feeling for our fellow creatures. Our feeling for our fellow creatures. So, next is coming from an empathic bond and connection. The feeling for our fellow creatures, where we have a deep empathic connection. From that connection, it can arise. Even there, we need to see it is to the deity behind that veil of appearance we are offering. Third is by our idea of what is for the good of others. So here, others need not be your immediate network of relationships and empathy connections, but the larger good of the world. What will be a right thing to do for the welfare of the world? Even there, it is the outer appearances of the world. It is the veil. Behind the veil is the deity. Or by the direction of one whom we accept as a human master. That's the fourth. This journey is complex, challenging. It's natural to have someone as a mentor, as a guide, as a master, whom we see representing the path, who has walked the path, established himself or herself on the path, and is in a position to guide others. So by the direction of one whom we accept as a human master, wiser than ourselves and for us, the representative of that Lord of all works in whom we believe. Even behind the master, the human master, whom we are approaching, it is the Lord of all works, whom we believe, but whom we do not yet know. So the Lord of the Master we are yet to know directly, intimately. It is through the veil we are coming in touch. Whatever be this range of action, whether it is through duty or good of others, or the empathy with fellow creatures, or following the direction, guidance of a human master, whatever be it, the principle is the same. The essential of the sacrifice of works must be there. And essential is the surrender of all desire for the fruit of our works. Fruit of our works. Whatever we do, there is a tendency to look at it as there is an investment, and that investment must bring some returns. That's the fruit that we are seeking in our normal consciousness. I do this in order to get this. The essential of the sacrifice of works must be there. And the essential is the surrender of all desire for the fruits of work. We desire the result, the fruits. The renunciation of all attachment to the result for which we labor. So desire should not be there, and renunciation to the attachment to the result should not be there. So on one hand is desiring result while doing work. Second is when there is a result, we get attached to the result. Both must go. So a desireless action, and whatever be the result, no attachment to the result. The essential of the sacrifice of works must be there, and the essential is the surrender of all desire. So desire is surrendered for the fruits of our works. The renunciation of all attachment to the result for which yet we labor. So there is a labor of love. A result for which we are laboring, but without attachment, without desire. There is a labor that creates result. But this labor is desireless, and whatever be the result, no attachment to the result. For so long as we work with attachment to the result, the sacrifice is offered not to the divine, but to our ego. So this attachment to the result naturally brings in the presence of the ego. So long as we work with attachment to the result, the sacrifice is offered to not to the divine, but to our own ego. We may think otherwise, but we are deceiving ourselves. So it's quite possible to deceive ourselves. And ego is very, very clever in fooling us. We are making our idea of the divine, our sense of duty, our feeling for fellow creatures, our idea of what is good for the world or others, even our obedience to the master, a mask for our egoistic satisfactions and preferences, and a spacious shield against the demand made on us to root all desire out of our nature. So whether we use the covering of duty or our connection with the fellow creatures or for the welfare of the good, or even I am obeying my master, all this can be used as a shield, a cover-up for the ego. That's quite possible, a mask of our egoistic satisfaction and preferences. These are very, very easy to do. If we are not vigilant, we are conscious in detail of inner movement. A mask of our egoistic satisfactions and preferences, and a spacious shield against the demands made on us to root all desire out of our nature. desire to be plucked out from its very, very roots. Third paragraph. At this stage of the yoga, and even throughout the yoga, this form of desire, this figure of the ego, is the enemy against whom we have to be always on guard with an unsleeping vigilance. Unsleeping vigilance. Very high degree of vigilance against both desire and ego, because it's very easy for these two characters to walk in and create a cover-up. Even when we imagine ourselves doing the consecration, behind the veil can still be the ego, still be the desire. So at this stage of the yoga, and even throughout the yoga, this form of desire, this form of ego is the enemy against whom we have to be always on guard with an unsleeping vigilance. It is something that we have to see very clearly ourselves so that we can uproot it from the very foundations. We need not be discouraged when we find him lurking within us. Ego lurking within us. We may think that I have overcome, but one day you discover the fellow is hidden. And assuming all sort of disguises, but we should be vigilant to detect him in all his masks and inexorable in expelling his influence. So we should not be slack in our efforts, unstoppable in our conscious effort to uproot the ego, uproot the desire from all the movements that is happening physically, vitally, mentally, to see that is it the ego that is animating? Is it desire that is animating? And progressively erase the ego and desire. We need not be discouraged when we find him lurking within us and assuming all sorts of disguises, but we should be vigilant to detect him in all his masks and inexorable in expelling his influence. The illumining word of this movement is the decisive line of the Gita. To action thou hast a right, but never under any circumstance to its fruit. So it's very well known. Ma phalechu. Don't desire any fruits of your action. To action you have the right. So we have the right for action, but not to the result. But never under any circumstance to its fruit. Fruit belongs solely to the Lord of all works. All works. Everything that is happening in the universe is done by the Lord of the works. So the fruits belong to the Master. We are instruments through which the Master is working. And whatever be the results produced belong to the Master, not to the instrument. The fruit belongs solely to the Lord of all works. Our only business with it is to prepare success by a true and careful action and to offer it, if it comes to the Divine Master. Our only business with it is to prepare success. So in any action, we are not doing it carelessly. We want the result, but we are not doing it out of desire, nor are we doing it out of attachment to desire. Doesn't mean any carelessness. There is an intended action that we are doing it for a right consequence. Our business with it is to prepare success by a true and careful action, and to offer it. If it comes to the Divine Master, whatsoever be the results that came through the work, offer it to the Master. Don't ever consider that the success that you have received is your success. No, offer it to the Divine, to whom it belongs. The fruits belong solely to the Lord of all works. Our only business with it is to prepare success by a true and careful action and offer it. If it comes to the Divine Master. So often people confuse desireless action and detachment from the result, and you tend to slack. After all, whatever is done, there will be something coming out of it. That will be very low, unconscious, tamasic way of doing things. We are consciously, vigilantly looking at what is the right way to do action so that the right result comes. But we are offering that results to the Divine, and result doesn't belong to us. And also the action is not for the result out of desire for results. But yes, we want the result, but action is without desire, because desire distorts and there comes attachment to the result. Everything has to be eliminated, erased from our being. Afterwards, even as we have renounced attachment to the fruit, we must renounce attachment to the work also. So on one hand, there is work and the result, the fruits of work. So once you remove the attachment to the result, work still there. One can be attached to work. You had been doing a work for many years and you get attached to that work. You build an identity around the work. It's very easy to create your identity around this or that work, and this has to be eliminated. We must renounce attachment to work also. At any moment, we must be prepared to change one work, one course, or one field of action for another, or abandon works, if that is the clear command of the Master. So there should be that suppleness and freedom to, if necessary, even abandon the work, all works, if that is what the Master is asking, or shift from one work to another work or to another field. That flexibility. So one should not have a clinging, an attachment to any type of work. If Master demands you to change the work, change the work. Change the field, change the field. If the Master is asking you to abandon all works, abandon all works. And we can see that in Sri Aurobindo's life, the way he dropped politics. The moment he got Adesh to drop everything, to go to Chandranagar, he dropped everything. Even publication of Karma Yogin magazine, he had written articles, lined up everything, but the day he received command, he left, went to Chandranagar. From Chandranagar, he came to Pondicherry, leaving everything behind, because there was the command of the Master. Otherwise, we do the act not for his sake, but for our satisfaction and pleasure in the work, from the kinetic nature's need of action, or for the fulfillment of our propensities. But these are all stations and refuges of the ego. So within us, there is a kinetic nature, a dynamic nature that has a need for action. Energy in us has this compulsive need for action. And those who are typically high energy type, very active type, if you ask them to do nothing and be still, rest, do nothing, for a day, for a week, it will be impossible. That's because the kinetic energy that is animating them, they don't have a mastery over that energy. You become a slave of the kinetic force. So you cannot pause, you cannot stop. That is not freedom. That is again slavery. And for the fulfillment of our propensities, there are propensities within us. Certain directional movement, trends, compulsions, all that become the refuge of the ego. The stations where ego takes its easy location. So if you don't renounce attachment to work and be free to move out of work or shift work one to another, we have a high chance of falling into these traps, and otherwise we do the act not for his sake. We are not doing the work for the Lord, but for our satisfaction and pleasure in work. Our satisfaction and pleasure. There is a pleasure that comes through work. When we do creative work in particular, our work becomes creative, because creativity is not something that is limited to a particular area of work. Any work can become creative. And out of that, there is tremendous pleasure that comes in work, tremendous joy that comes in work, tremendous satisfaction that comes in work. And there is a kinetic nature's need of action and fulfillment of our propensities. All that become part of it. When that happens, it is the ego we are serving, not the master. So otherwise, we do the acts not for his sake, but for our satisfaction and pleasure in the work, from the kinetic nature's need of action, or for the fulfillment of propensities. But these are all stations and refuges of the ego. Stations and refuges. On our progress, these are all stations and refuges. Stations because for many people, they find that I can enjoy only certain kind of work. There is a whole range of things I consider very mundane, very boring. From that stage to arrive at, everything can be enjoyed, that itself is a station on the way. Even there, to say no attachment to any work. If you have to renounce everything, renounce everything. All that is required to be free. However necessary for our ordinary motion of life, they have to be abundant in the growth of the spiritual consciousness and replaced by divine counterparts. There is a regular normal life which is animated by desire, animated by dynamic, kinetic propulsions, propensities, drives. That's the normal life. But we are here to go beyond that normal drive and motive engine behind action and replace them with their divine counterparts. And Ananda, an impersonal God-directed delight, will cast out or supplant the unillumined vital satisfaction and pleasure. So the vital satisfaction and pleasure that we get in the work gets replaced by Ananda, that is directed towards the divine. And Ananda, an impersonal and God-directed delight. It is impersonal. There is nothing personal about this Ananda. It is self-existent, impersonal delight that flows through the instrument, and you recognize, wow, that's beautiful. And it is very, very different from vital satisfaction and pleasure that we normally experience in the regular type of work and its pleasures. A joyful driving of the divine energy, the kinetic need. There is a kinetic need, like a wheel spinning, the energy spinning that has to roll out into action. That is the normal action. This will be replaced by a joyful driving of the divine energy. There is a joyful driving, a drive that is arising out of tremendous freedom. There is ananda, there is joy, a joyful driving of the divine energy, the kinetic need. The fulfillment of the propensities will no longer be an object or a necessity. There will be instead the fulfillment of the divine will through the natural dynamic truth in action, or a free soul and a luminous nature. Luminous action of a free soul and a luminous nature. So the fulfillment of propensities, because we have our samskaras and its drives and compulsions and propensities, all that progressively get replaced with fulfillment of the divine will. Divine will is acting in the world through all the instruments, and you are attuning with the divine will. And it is the fulfillment of that divine will unfolding through our instrumentation. Through the natural dynamic truth in action. There is a dynamic truth in action. There is a static truth of the being, and there is a dynamic truth in action. That is what sets the action forward of a free soul and a luminous nature. Your soul liberates itself and becomes free and luminous, and its light is radiating through the instrumentation. The self-existent light radiates increasingly through you with its joyful drive of the divine energy, its ananda. The Satchidananda slowly pouring into the instrumentation. However necessary for our ordinary motion of life, they have to be abundant in the growth of the spiritual consciousness and replaced by divine counterparts. An ananda, an impersonal and God-directed delight, will cast out or supplant the unillumined vital satisfaction and pleasure, joyful driving of the divine energy, the kinetic need. The fulfillment of the propensities will no longer be an object or a necessity. There will be instead the fulfillment of the divine will through the natural dynamic truth in action, or a free soul and a luminous nature. Our normal vital nature, mental nature, these are unillumined, dark grayish. Into that there is a growing illumination of the radiance of the light of truth and its power, ananda, joy operating through the instruments. In the end, as the attachment to the fruits of work and to the work itself has been excised from the heart, so also the last clinging attachment to the idea and sense of ourselves as the doer has to be relinquished. The divine Shakti must be known and felt above and within us as the true and sole worker. So to the last notion to be discarded here, like first is the elimination of desire, then elimination of ego. That too is not enough. The notion that I am the doer has to be replaced with, it is the Shakti who is the doer. And Shakti present above, Shakti present deep within. It is she who is propelling all things, the Shakti of the divine, Shakti of the Supreme who is acting. So in the end, as the attachment to the fruits of the work and to the work itself has been excised from the heart, so the fruits of the work and work itself, attachments, these are all eliminated. Desire for the fruit, attachment to the fruit, and attachment to work itself, everything is excised from the heart. It is not just from the head conceptually, it is from the heart itself it has been eliminated. So also the last clinging attachment to the idea and sense of ourselves as the doer has to be relinquished. So this eventually has to be consciously erased. The divine Shakti must be known and felt above and within us above and within us. These are the two positions we must keep note of it. There is Shakti above, there is Shakti within. Above and within us as the true and sole worker. So there is the Supreme, and there is the worker, and there is the instrument. These are the three parties involved in yoga. We are the instruments. Through this instrument, the Shakti, the divine Shakti is working, and she is working for the Supreme, the Lord of the works. These are the three parties of the yoga. So with that, we have come to the end of this episode 108, which is a beautiful number. Here we see the famous lines from the Gita, renouncing the attachment to the fruits of works, and attachment to works, and attachment to the very notion that I am the worker. And we are seeing these three parts of the whole movement. The Supreme, for whom the divine worker, the divine Shakti is working, and she is using the instruments to fulfill the divine manifestation here on earth. All life is yoga, and everything is done by the divine Shakti. We are nothing but instrumental conditions, nimitta matrena, as Gita would say. So we are eliminating attachment to the results, attachment to the work itself, and the notion that we are the workers. Thank you for being with me in this journey. Please do share your insights, your observations, your suggestions. Looking forward to meet you again next week. Thank you.